You are listening to the Cabin of Horrors podcast. Go behind the scenes of all your favorite horror movies from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and now. I am your host, the Incredible Josh.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for tuning into this episode of the Cabin of Horrors podcast. I know I said last week we were going over the Shudder Original Dead stream. We're not going to be doing that this week, but I will tell you why. First of all, I didn't do my research before saying that I was going to review Deadstream. I saw Deadstream and I thought it was the perfect movie to talk about at the cabin because it's got that perfect level of campiness, horror, and real life inspiration that I feel everyone needs to see this movie, especially if you're into YouTube or Twitch, or even if you're a streamer or YouTuber yourself. This movie really will hit you hard. I'm telling you, because I guarantee you know somebody like this guy. So the reason why we're not going over it this week is, for one, with all of my research and everything, there's just not a single source of information for the production development of the film. There's tons of interviews and places where I can grab them from, but I just don't have the time. And I don't want to delay the podcast another week because I don't have the time to do the research on the film, so I'm going to change it. But on the flip side of things is because I'm actually trying to get some of the cast or crew to come onto the podcast for an interview. And I know that's a little bit weird to hear if you're a long-standing listener of the podcast, because I've never done interviews before. Interviews aren't a thing at Cabin of Horrors podcast, but that's going to be changing, because we actually have an interview coming up this season. I have interviewed the director of the horror film Surrogate, and the film itself is incredible. If you haven't seen it yet, you can actually watch it for free on Tubi, and I highly suggest you do, because I've interviewed the director of Surrogate, and I'm going to be releasing that episode on June 6th. So I highly suggest, guys, that you go out, watch the film Surrogate. It is a supernatural film that gives me super Babadook vibes, The Ring vibes, Grudge vibes. It is a all-around really good supernatural film. So go on Tubi, or if it's not on Tubi in your region, seriously search Surrogate and watch it. Whether or not you have to rent it or not, trust me, it is worth it. Excellent movie, and I will be interviewing the director, and the episode for that will be dropping on June the 6th. So hopefully I can get some of the cast and crew on from Deadstream, because it would be really cool to interview them and talk a little bit about how unique this film is, and how, in my opinion, it truly is the Evil Dead of a generation. But if we don't get them on, that's fine, because we'll be going over Deadstream on a later episode of the podcast. This week, we're going to be going over the supernatural film The Babadook. It is an Australian horror film, and one of the reasons I want to go over this film is to prepare you guys for my interview with the director of Surrogate, because I seriously got a lot of Babadook vibes, and it's also another Australian horror film. So I figured by going over the Babadook, we can kind of get prepared and get our vibes going for that episode coming up with the director of Surrogate. The Babadook was written and directed by Jennifer Kent in her feature directorial debut, and was produced by Christina Caton and Christian Moliere, which I've probably butchered their names and I apologize. It stars Essie Davis, Noah Wiseman, Daniel Henschel, Haley McElhenney, Barbara West, and Ben Winspear. And it's based on a 2005 short film titled Monster. The story follows a widowed single mother who must confront her son's fear of a mysterious monster in their home. Writer and director Jennifer Kent had attended the National Institute of Dramatic Art, where she studied acting alongside Essie Davis, and graduated in 1991. She then worked primarily as an actor in the film industry for over 2 decades, but eventually lost her passion for acting by the end of the 1990s, and sent a written proposal to Danish filmmaker Lars von Trier asking if she could assist on the set of his 2003 drama film Dogville to learn more from him. He accepted her proposal and considered the experience her quote-unquote film school, citing the importance of stubbornness as the key lesson that she learned. Prior to The Babadook, Jennifer Kent had completed a short film called Monster, and an episode of the television series Too Twisted. She explained in May of 2014 that the origins of Babadook could actually be found in the short film Monster, which she herself calls Baby Babadook. She began writing the screenplay for the film around 2009, and she said that she sought to tell a story about facing up to the darkness within ourselves, along with the fear of going mad and an exploration of parenting from a quote-unquote real perspective. Kent really drew from her experience on the set of Dogville for the assembling of her production team. She had observed that Von Trier was surrounded by a well-known family of people, so in that case she sought out to get her own family of collaborators to work with for the long term. She wasn't able to find all of the suitable people that she needed within the Australian film industry, so she went to hire Polish director of photography Radek Ludzik, for whom Babadook was actually his first ever English language film. And she also hired American illustrator Alexander Juhas. In terms of film influences, Kent had cited 1960s, 70s, and 80s horror, including movies like The Thing, Halloween, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Carnival of Souls, The Shining, Nosferatu, and although the process was challenging, she was forced to reduce their total budget overall. Producer Christina Caton managed to secure funding of around 2.5 million Australian. However, they still required an additional budget for the construction of the film sets. So to attain these extra funds, Kent and Causeway Films producer Christina Caton launched a Kickstarter crowdfunding campaign, and they launched this in June of 2012 with a target of around $30,000 USD. Their funding goal was reached by September 27, 2012. They received 259 backers, raising $30,071. Kent said that the crowdfunding closed a crucial gap that they needed to close, which covered the design and special effects expenses, so they were able to really help build a special visual world in the film. Filming primarily took place in Adelaide, South Australia, with most of the interior shots being filmed on a soundstage in the city, as funding was from the South Australian state government. This was a requirement that Kent needed to meet. To contribute to the universality of the film's appearance, a Victorian terrace-style house was specifically built for the film, because there's very few houses designed in this style in Adelaide, Australia. A script reading wasn't done because Noah Wiseman was actually only 6 years old at the time, and Kent wanted to focus instead on bonding, playing games, and lots of time spent with the actors so that they could become more familiar with one another and have a genuine on-screen chemistry with each other. Pre-production of The Babadook occurred in Adelaide and lasted about 3 weeks. During this time, Kent had conveyed a kiddie version of the narrative to Wiseman, in which young Samuel is the hero. Kent then took Wiseman to Adelaide Zoo to explain more of the story, and said that Wiseman was aware it was a scary film and that he knew how important his role was overall. What's really interesting is that Kent originally wanted to have The Babadook as a black and white film because she wanted to create a heightened feel that is still believable. Of course, being very much influenced by pre-1950s B-grade horror films, as they were very theatrical, she wanted Babadook to have that same visual, beautiful, and terrifying feel. However, Kent later lost interest in the idea of The Babadook being a black and white film, and she worked closely with production designer Alex Holmes and Radek to create a very cool and claustrophobic interior environment with meticulously designed sets. Kent described the overall filming process of The Babadook as stressful because of Wiseman's age. Now, in terms of the Babadook monster and the special effects of the film, Kent was adamant from the beginning of production that a lo-fi and handmade approach needed to be used. Kent used stop-motion effects for the monster, and a large amount of smoothing was completed in post-production. The Babadook premiered globally in January of 2014 at the Sundance Film Festival. It then received a limited theatrical release in Australia in May of 2014, following a screening in April 2014 at the Stanley Film Festival. The film then opened in the UK for general release on October 17, 2014, and the United States it released in November 28, 2014. When The Babadook opened in Australia on May 22, 2014, it was released in just 13 cinemas on a limited release, and it went on to gross a total of only $258,000. And funny enough, the film actually did better internationally than it had done in Australia. In North America, The Babadook opened on a limited release basis in 3 theaters and grossed $30,000. That's a pretty good amount just to be released in 3 theaters in America. The film also went on to be ranked in the 42nd position at the box office and went on to gross $964,413 in the US and $9.9 million elsewhere in the world. So it had only made $258,000 in Australia and made like more than triple that in the US and God knows how much quadruple duple more elsewhere to bring it to that 9.9 million. And the budget of The Babadook was an estimated production of only $2 million. So worldwide box office takings were $10.3 million. And it's very interesting to me that there hasn't been any spin-offs or sequels or franchises for this film because it made $8.3 million. But at the same time, because of the grueling effects of filming and how challenging it was for Kent, I'm not surprised at the same time that they didn't go back and revisit this and try to recapture that essence that The Babadook had. I don't even know if you could, to be completely honest with you. I feel like The Babadook is one of those once-in-a-lifetime films that you can't recreate the essence, the vibe, and the feel of it. Like a sequel would have just killed it. I'm glad there's no sequel for it. I really am, because The Babadook it's on its own, just a creepy, unsettling story. Like, I love The Babadook. I don't think I've mentioned that yet on this episode, but I love The Babadook. Excellent film, absolutely amazing. And the fact that it went on to make this much money outside of its home audience and its home box office is really great because it shows promise for foreign horror films. Just because you release a film in, let's say, Taiwan or in Korea or in Australia, there's so much more reach now that you can have globally, and you can make money in different markets. You don't have to just release your film in your home market. You can now release it internationally. Streaming services, like, there's so much you could do now to make a lot more money so that you can keep bringing new stories to life. Like, The Babadook is an original, unique story. This isn't something that was recreated. This isn't something that was rebooted. This was a unique horror story, and it was executed and done so freaking well. Well, without further ado, let's dive in. Let's talk about The Babadook and everything that happens in the movie. We start the film off by meeting Amelia Vanek. She's a troubled and exhausted widow living in Adelaide, South Australia, and she's brought up her 6-year-old son Samuel all alone by herself. Her late husband Oscar had been killed in a car accident when he drove Amelia to the hospital during labor. Sam throughout his life begins displaying erratic behavior. He becomes an insomniac and is preoccupied with an imaginary monster, which he has built weapons to fight. And Amelia is forced to pick him up from school one day when he takes one of the weapons there to school. During the day, Amelia ends up finding a book outside of her doorstep titled The Babadook. Samuel asks his mother if he can read the pop-up story called Mr. Babadook. It describes a monster known as the Babadook, who's a tall, pale-faced humanoid in a top hat with taloned fingers, and it torments its victims after they become aware of its existence. Amelia is immediately disturbed by the book and its mysterious appearance outside their home. Sam becomes convinced that the Babadook is actually real. Sam continues to be persistent about the existence of the Babadook, and this leads Amelia to have sleepless nights as she tries to comfort him. Soon after, however, strange events begin to occur. Doors mysteriously open and close, there's strange sounds around the house, and Amelia finds glass shards in her food. She begins to attribute these events to Sam's behavior, but he blames the Babadook. Amelia then immediately rips up the book and disposes of it. Later on at her birthday party, Sam's cousin Ruby bullies Sam for not having a father, and he pushes her out of her treehouse, which breaks her nose. Amelia's sister Claire then admits to her that she cannot bear Sam and his disabilities, to which Amelia takes great offense. Later on the drive home, Sam begins to have another vision of the Babadook and he suffers a seizure. Amelia then treats him with sedatives from a pediatrician. The next morning, Amelia finds the Mr. Babadook book has been reassembled on her front doorstep. And now there's new words in the book that are taunting her, saying that the Babadook will become stronger if she continues to deny its existence. And now the pop-up book contains images of her killing their dog Bugsy, Sam, and then herself. This absolutely terrifies her, so instead of ripping the book this time, she decides she's going to burn the book and then runs to the police station after she receives a disturbing phone call, where on the other line, all she heard was, Babadook. However, when she gets to the police station, she has no proof of stalking whatsoever, and when she's looking behind the police officer at the station, she then sees the Babadook suit hung up behind the front desk. So she then leaves, and later that night tries to fall asleep, but sees the Babadook open her bedroom door, then crawl up the ceiling and attack her. She then turns on all the lights in the house and falls asleep with Sam downstairs. After this attack, Amelia becomes more isolated and impatient. She shouts at Samuel for quote-unquote disobeying her constantly, and she begins to have more visions of the Babadook as well. She exhibits erratic and violent behavior, including cutting the phone line with a knife and then waving the knife around aggressively at Sam. She also has disturbing hallucinations in which she sees herself murdering Sam. Amelia then sees an apparition of Oscar, who offers to return to her if she brings the boy to him. Realizing, though, that he's a creation of the Babadook, she flees, and the Babadook stalks her throughout the house until it finally possesses her. While she's under its influence, she breaks Bugsy's neck and attempts to kill Sam. Sam lures her into the basement and knocks her out. He then ties her up, and Amelia wakes up with Sam being terrified nearby. She tries to strangle him, and he lovingly caresses her face, causing her to throw up an inky black substance, which seemingly expels the Babadook. However, Sam reminds Amelia that you can't get rid of the Babadook. Then an unseen force drags him backwards into Amelia's bedroom. She saves Sam, but is then forced to see a vision of her husband's death. She's furious and confronts the Babadook, making it retreat into the basement, and she locks the door behind it. Amelia and Sam begin to recover. She's attentive and caring towards him, encouraging him with building his weapons and being impressed at his magic tricks. In the garden, they gather worms in a bowl, and Amelia takes it to the basement and places it on the floor. The Babadook tries to attack her, but she soothes it, and it retreats to the corner, taking the bowl of worms with it. She then returns to the yard and celebrates Sam's birthday. An absolute incredible film that touches on a lot of things. It touches on disabilities with youth like autism and seizures, things of that sort. It also touches on the challenges of being a single mom while having those additional challenges. And then just the mental health aspect of all of that surrounding it. It really did a good job of touching on each of those pieces and giving it its own commentary, while at the same time tying it all together to push the story forward. It's an absolute phenomenal film. If you haven't seen The Babadook, I highly recommend watching it. It is definitely, I would say, in my top 3 horror movies of the last 15 years. It is just one of those films that you have to watch. If you haven't seen it, you're truly missing out on a unique story. But that wraps us up for this portion of the podcast. We're now going to head in to our Decade in Review series. And we're going to talk about an absolutely absurd creature feature film. And I'm talking about this because this is actually a film that I stream live on Twitch. It's not currently in the rotation, but I have streamed this on Twitch, and it can be a movie that we put in the rotation if you want it. But that means you have to head over to my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Cabin of Horrors, and drop it in the comments, join the Discord, and there's a movie request option in there that you can drop in there and say, hey, I want to see Dracula versus Frankenstein. And if you let me know, I'll put it in the rotation, and then you can watch this movie live on Twitch with me and everyone else in our horror community. The movie we're going to be going over from 1971 is Dracula versus Frankenstein, which was developed under the title of Blood Freaks the Bloodsuckers. And Paul Lucas was initially set to play the role that eventually went to J. Carrol Naish. The film is directed by Al Adamson and stars J. Carrol Naish, Lon Chaney Jr., Anthony Isley, Regina Carroll, and Angelo Rosito. To accommodate all of the actors' schedules, shooting began before production elements were even in place. And this was actually the last film by J. Carrol Naish and Lon Chaney. After completing a rough cut of the film, production supervisor Sam Sherman felt that the film lacked a little punch, so they added the Dracula and Frankenstein's monster into the film, while a motorcycle angle was downplayed. But let's talk about this film, because if you like what you hear, because I guarantee you haven't seen this, let's be honest, you probably haven't seen Dracula vs. Frankenstein, or maybe you have, totally possible, but in case you haven't, and you really want to see it after what you hear, come on over to my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Cabin of Horrors, and we can play this. We can play this whenever you want. We can have a good time. So the film starts off with mad scientist Dr. Duria, the last descendant of the original Dr. Frankenstein. He takes to murdering young girls for experimentation in hopes of perfecting a blood serum of his own creation. With help from his mute, simple-minded assistant Groton, Duria hopes that the serum will heal his paralyzed legs and cure Groton of his condition. Count Dracula comes to the scientist and promises to help him revive the Frankenstein monster in return for the serum, which he hopes will grant him the ability to go out in the sunlight, thus making him invincible. As a cover, the two of them work out of a secret laboratory hidden behind the Creature Emporium, which is a haunted house exhibit and a throwback to the old sideshow days. It's located on the Boardwalk Amusement Park in Venice, California. They bring the monster back to life, and Duria sends him and Dracula out to exact revenge on the man who both discredited him and crippled him in a laboratory fire, Dr. Beaumont. At the same time, a Las Vegas showgirl, Judith Fontaine, has arrived. She's looking for her missing sister Joni, who was last seen hanging out with a group of hippies led by Strange. Judith has gotten no satisfaction from Sergeant Martin. She says that she's going to go investigate on her own, so she does so, and she attracts the attention of Biker Rico and his gang of LSD misfits. Rico ends up slipping her some LSD while they're at a dive bar, and Judith begins to go on a trip. She's taken by Strange and his girlfriend Samantha, who have just finished attending a protest, to the home of aging fellow hippie Mike Howard, and he agrees to help her find Joni. So Judith, Mike, Samantha, and Strange all go to the Creature Emporium, and Judith shows Duria a picture of Joni, asking her if he has seen her, but he says that he has not. More girls over time now turn up missing. The monster kills a couple of police officers while trying to abduct a girl for Duria's experiments. Groton goes to the beach with an axe and kills Rico and his gang before they can get a hold of Samantha. Then Gordon takes her into Duria's laboratory through a trap door with a ladder, and that leads to the beach below the Creature Emporium. Judith and Mike then head towards the Emporium and discover the trapdoor and the laboratory, where they then confront Duria. He explains that the girls who were killed were frightened before their deaths. This created a special enzyme in their blood, which is the main ingredient for his blood serum. He also tells Judith that after he has Mike killed, her fear upon seeing Mike's death will help him complete the serum at last. Duria then sends Groton and a dwarf named Grasbo. I didn't say this movie was good. It's campy. It's obviously campy. It's titled Dracula vs. Frankenstein. But it's a great kind of campy. Alright? Great kind of campy. So he sends the dwarf named Grasbo, who's the ticket taker at the Creature Emporium, after the two. Grasbo falls through the laboratory's trapdoor to the beach and then onto an axe that he had dropped beforehand while holding onto the ladder. This effectively kills him, and Groton then goes after Judith. Sergeant Martin and Strange show up, and they are with the rest of the police department as well. Martin shoots Groton from the rooftop of the building, from which he falls off to his death. Duria falls from his wheelchair into a guillotine display in the Emporium while attempting to escape and ends up getting beheaded. Dracula then meets Judith. He hypnotizes her and binds her with a rope to a railing. He then confronts Mike, who shoves a lit car flare in the monster's face, which forces him to briefly turn on Dracula. Mike unties Judith and they run away together, but as they do so, Dracula blasts Mike with a fire shot out from his one-eyed demon-headed ring, which burns him to ashes. Judith faints upon seeing Mike's death and slowly wakes up to find herself bound with rope again to a chair, and she's in an abandoned and desecrated church in a forest area outside of Venice. This is where Dracula's coffin is hidden. Dracula is about to drink her blood and turn her into his vampire bride, but the monster shows up, completely fallen for her beauty, and turns against Dracula. The monster forces Dracula out of the church and into the surrounding forest, where a fierce battle ensues between the two. Dracula then tears off the monster's arm and head, but gets caught in the sun rays before he can make it back to his coffin and disintegrates into the dust. Judith manages to free herself and sees Dracula's ashes and clothing. She picks up Dracula's ring at the church door, but after a brief flashback of everything that's happened to her, drops it and flees in fear. And that wraps us up for Dracula versus Frankenstein. I hope I did it justice. I hope it sounded good to you. And really, if it did, come on over to my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Cabin of Horrors. Drop a comment and let me know you want it, and I will put it on. In fact, if you come into the Twitch channel and you drop a comment saying that you want to watch this movie, I will immediately put it on for you. I will not have it available for anybody else. So come on into the Twitch channel, let me know you want to watch it, and I will play it for you right away. And that wraps us up for this episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you really enjoyed it. You can hang out with me and more horror content on my Instagram, instagram.com/Cabin of Horrors podcast. Check out the show notes for links to the community Discord. We have a brand new Discord server where you can come and talk about everything horror. You can stay up to date on everything about the podcast, about Twitch. I would absolutely love if you came and joined, so come and click that link in the show notes. And I'm also live on Twitch 24/7. Our Twitch stream has become a 24/7 live stream. You can literally come in and choose what you want to watch at any time. I do not intervene. I do not change things in the back end like I'm some sort of marionette. Everything is automated. You could come into the stream at 2 o'clock in the morning when I am passed out sleeping, trying to get my beauty rest, and you could play whatever channel reward is listed there and watch a movie. We've got like 14, 15 movies that you can choose from every single week. And that list of movies is always changing. Every Friday, the list of movies will change, and there's a new movie that will drop every Tuesday on Terror Tuesday. So make sure that you're coming over to the Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Cabin of Horrors. And next week, we are going to be coming back to you with a